Checking all my lenses for condition, but as far as testing goes, you don't get credit for them until you actually turn them on. So you got to do both, condition and operation. You got to do both of them. Then I come down and I got my brake lights, my turn signals, my running light, my reverse lights, and reflectors. Anytime you say lights, say and reflectors, because on the test it's lights and reflectors. You got to do both. The reflective lenses, they're reflective in nature at the top, but you got actual reflectors on the bottom. All that's clean, clear, no cracks, no missing lenses, and proper color. While I'm here approaching the back end of the bus, I'm also looking on the ground to make sure there's no puddles on the ground. Could be coming from anywhere. You know, check the different color of the fluids where you might know where it could be coming from. Antifreeze is usually green. Oil is more of a blackish tint. You know, things like that. So look at the colors and notice where the drip is at. I'm going to approach my engine. I'm going to start from left to right. Right here we have our coolant tank. You got sight glasses, so there's really no need to open it, especially when it's hot. Make sure the tank is secure with no leaks and the coolant is at proper level. All my hoses on this side, I'm looking at all clamps, making sure they're not rubbing on anything hot, and I'm making sure none of them are cut and none of my hoses are leaking. I have my engine oil. I would check for proper level. Transmission fluid's actually not on the test, but you should do it every day anyways and check it for proper level. We're going to work our way over, and I'm going to check my water pump, which is located right behind here. We want to make sure it's securely mounted, and we don't see any leaks coming from the water pump. Even though you see a belt in front of it, that water pump is actually internally driven by the motor, so we call it gear driven. Okay, it's a gear driven water pump. It's secure with no leaks. It also has your bigger or larger radiator hoses. Make sure the clamps are all on tight with no leaks. While I'm around the belt, I'm going to go ahead and check the belt to make sure there's no frays or cuts or tears in any of the belts. And when pushed in the middle somewhere, it shouldn't deflect any more than 3/4 of an inch. So you want to make sure that the belt is okay. Up at the top is your alternator. Want to make sure it's securely mounted. The wires have no frays or cuts or exposed wiring. Nice and secure.
What's up, Chris?
Hey, bud, how you been? And it's also belt driven, but I also checked the belt already, so I don't have to do that again. All right. Now, we're going to come around to this side, because we got to get to let's go better over here. We got our power steering fluid reservoir. For our hydraulic fluid, it covers the power steering fluid. It's a big tank. You're checking to make sure it's at proper level. All right, air compressor right here, up in the front of the motor. You see where I'm touching? Make sure it's securely mounted with no leaks and it's gear driven. Power steering pump is right behind it. I don't know if you can see it better from the front or the back. The hydraulic pump is attached to the air compressor right on the bottom down here. So you'd also make sure you check the power steering pump to make sure it's securely mounted with no leaks, and it's also gear driven, so you don't have to, there's no belt to check. Okay. All right. On this vehicle, because it's a rear engine, your drive shaft's going to face forward. So you want to look up underneath and see your drive shaft right here. You see it back there? Make sure it's securely mounted. It's not cracked, bent, or broken, or twisted with no debris in it. No loose or missing nuts or bolts. Okay, so don't forget your drive shaft. Okay. On your suspension, you can catch the majority of your suspension from here. It's an air ride suspension. You don't have any springs. So you're going to make sure that your airbag mounting brackets, top and bottom, are securely mounted. They're not cracked, bent, or broken with no loose or missing nuts or bolts. Check the airbags to make sure they're securely mounted. There's no air leaks or big holes in them. Your shock absorbers are right behind them. And make sure your shock absorbers are securely mounted with no leaks. And they're dual airbag system, but all I need you to do is just catch the one, at least one time in the back. Well, you don't have to do the ones in the front. You just, every day you should be looking at both sides, but for testing purposes, you only got to point one set up. You don't have to do both.
You got 4 in the back, 4 in the front.
That's right. And then we only got to do one side of the bus, because you're kind of splitting it down the middle. It's the same thing on both sides.
Okay.
So don't forget your airbags, airbag mounting brackets, shock absorbers.
All right.
And that'll cover that. All right. Then we got our rear tires. We want to make sure, because they're duals, we'll check the space between them. Make sure there's no rubbing, no touching, and no debris between the tires. You go to your valve stem, you make sure it has a cap on it. Right here, you see it? The air cap.
Yep.
Also, you would mention, with an air pressure gauge, I check for air pressure. So that's the first thing you check your tire for. The next thing I would check it for is what we call ABCs, abrasions, bubbles, and cuts. So, you know, on the sidewalls. Uneven wear, thread separation, steel belt poking out of the tires, any kind of damage to the tire you're looking for. And then finally, you got to, like on your written exam, if you remember the thread depth. The rear thread depth has to be a minimum of 2/32, right? Then I go down to my rims. I'll make sure my rims are not cracked, bent, or broken with no aftermarket welding. My lug nuts, I'm checking all my lugs to make sure that they're there and they're tight. Good indication is little rust streaks going down the side of the lug nuts. Shiny threads. In this case, you got spacer rings behind them. Make sure there's no loose spacers. Things like that would indicate a loose lug. And when it's really bad, you start seeing little cracks around the lug bolt holes. Okay, so that's all the different indications of a loose lug nut. And finally, your axle seal. This big thing right in the center. Make sure it's securely mounted. There's no loose or missing nuts or bolts. It's not cracked or distorted, and it's not leaking on either side. Typically, sometimes they go to leaking on the backside. And when they go to leaking on the backside, the oil or grease ends up into your brake pads. And we're going to get to that next. What side is easy to catch? The brake chambers and all in the back or in the front of the axle?
Brake chamber in the front, if you turn the wheel slightly, you see them better from the front.
I'm talking about on the rear axle.
Yeah, the real axle is right in the back of the banjo houses. It's hard to see. They're way up top.
Oh, Lord, I see them. The same thing here. I'm going to show them to you in the front. But because of where they're located, we don't permit the people to, because the bus is so low to the ground when you come to the test, we don't permit the people to crawl under something that's so low to the ground. But you're going to have to remember to call out the parts. The easiest way to do that, well, I'm going to show them to you in the front because we can get to those. The ones in the back, you ain't going to be able to get to them when you come riding over there. If the bus was all the way up in the air, I could show them to you better in the back. But you're looking at the hoses that come down to the chamber. You got to check that for leaks. Make sure they're secure on both ends, no leaks, no cuts. The brake chambers, a little round pot. Want to make sure it's securely mounted, no holes, dents, or cracks in it. And make sure it's not leaking in the air. This one?
Up.
Oh, I see it. Going up. I need one in there like this on the yard. That's right. Right in the middle. You see how hard they are to get to if they was all the way on the ground? You got all your air hoses, secure with no leaks. These are your brake chambers. Make sure there's no holes, dents, or cracks. See, these things are called squeeze bands that hold the two parts together. Make sure they're on tight. Then you got your push rod and your slack adjuster. The push rod can't be bent, cracked, or broken, or twisted. You got to make sure this pin and the cotter key is in place, and that's what holds it to the slack adjuster. When the brakes are released on the inside, because there's springs, that's your emergency spring brakes, are inside these chambers. The only way you can move that by hand would be if the brakes were released on the dash, you know, the button. But for the test, you don't have to go through all that. Just know that if you're trying to check them, they ain't gonna move unless you would, you know, release the brakes first. And you would make sure when pushed by hand, they shouldn't move any more than an inch. These are what they call self-adjusting slack adjusters. You're actually allowed up to 1.5 inches. If you don't know how to tell, just remember 1 inch and you'll always stay within adjustment. Then I can see my brake pads, but you have rock shields open. See right here is your brake drum and your brake pads are inside. And they usually got inspection ports, which I don't see one on the bottom. Typically there's one on the top and one on the bottom to be able to inspect your brake pads to make sure they're not worn dangerously thin. and that rear axle seal is not leaking any grease or oil into the brake pads that cause them to slip and fail. Okay? So that covers everything under here. Okay? All right. Now, as we're going down the side, we got more lights and reflectors. We're checking red in the back, amber in the front. They're all clean and clear with no crack windows. No missing things. All that seems to be okay. Now here we got our fuel tank cap to make sure the cap is on tight with no leaks coming from the cap. And your fuel tank is securely mounted. You don't see no leaks coming from the fuel tank. So the fuel cap, the in tank, and the two different things to get you that one. All right.
Fuel tank,
The cap. Now this door is not on the test, but you should check it all the time, just like you should check your regular insurance. But we can skip it for the test. Okay, we're gonna come to this axle, and basically you gotta do the same exact thing we did before. Let's see where we can get to all the parts better. All right. For the test, what we would do is we would turn the steering wheel all the way where you can see it. We would turn it facing that way, to the right. Up above, you got your air hoses again. See up there? And your chamber, right there.
yes.
Smaller because there's no springs in it, like the back of the rear spring brake. Your slack adjusting push rodders in the front. And your brake pads, you can actually see your pads and your drums. On this one, there's no dust shield on the way. Check the pads for thickness and drums for cracks. No cracks, grooves, or holes. No dangerously worn thin. You got to have at least a 1/4 inch on your brake pads, and the axle seal is not leaking any oil into the brake pads. So it's all done the same way. On the suspension on this bus, again, you got dual airbag suspension, so you're checking your shock absorbers, airbags way at the top, which you should be able to see when the wheel's going to be turned, and the airbag mounting brackets. So airbag mounts, nuts and bolts that hold it. Airbags, make sure they're secure with no leak. Check the shock absorber, also securely mounted with no leak. Your brake hose, your brake chamber, your push rod, your slack adjuster, your brake pads and drums all over again. So we'll turn the wheel to get to that, but when you get to the back end for your test, all I want you to say is I'll do the back end just like I did the front end, and all you really got to do is tell me what's different about it. Okay? Well, once you cover the front,
Well, what's different is there's 4 back there with the airbag.
that's 4 in the front too. You got 1 in the back and 1 in the front. So there's 2 on this side and 2 on the other side. So you got 4 in the front and 4 in the back as well. Well, again, we're only splitting the bus down the middle. So it would be done the same exact way. It's just back there, you won't be able to get to the parts as you can when the wheel's going to be turned here. Because it's way up there and you would have to go way under the bus. We don't mind people going way under the bus, but these buses are too low to the ground to actually get under there fairly easily. All right, we can go down with this button or that one? Same thing? No, we're getting stuck.
I'm sorry, you said LA1 is on the drive?
No working.
Oh, just on Tiger Drive. Okay, 10-4. Back by the jailhouse. 10-4.